As the children at St. Mark's orphanage finished decorating their tree and singing their carols, they could only imagine how magical their tree really was. Heading to bed that Christmas Eve, they all stared longingly at their stockings, knowing that come morning they would still remain empty. Yet they all made their Christmas wishes for a joy-filled, magical Christmas day. Little did they know their wishes had been heard. In their falling-apart chilly dining room, where the Christmas tree stood, gold dust began to swirl around the tree. Glowing and twinkling like a night star, the decorations began to move. They were coming to life. As the Christmas fairy blinked open her eyes to see the bare hall they were in, it troubled her to know that the children here were very poor and were not going to enjoy Christmas as much as other children around the world. She was not going to stand for this. Floating down from the top of the tree, she woke up the rest of the decorations. Stretching and shivering from the cold, they were also horrified to learn about the lack of Christmas, and they agreed they couldn't just sit and do nothing. With it already 9 o'clock Christmas Eve, they had a lot to do in such a short amount of time. Climbing off the tree, they set about to work, but as the Christmas fairy looked about, there simply were not enough of them. She felt hopeless. Suddenly, there was the sound of tiny tap, tap, tapping coming from the window. Pulling back the moth-eaten curtain, there on the other side of the glass, she saw hundreds of baubles, candy canes, strings of bells, hanging stars, wooden soldiers, and 5 more Christmas fairies in the orphan garden. Opening the window to let them in from the cold, the other fairies explained that they had also heard the children's wishes and were here to help. Filled with delight, the Christmas fairies set about listing what needed to be done. The wooden soldiers set off to the forest to fetch more logs for the fire. The bells set about quietly tuning the piano so that the children could sing their carols with music. The candy canes hopped off to the kitchen to see if they could rustle up some mince pies and puddings, whilst the baubles set about cleaning the house and making paper chains out of anything they could find: newspaper, napkins, and handkerchiefs. With work underway and the other fairies looking over everything, the orphanage Christmas fairy set off for one of the most important jobs: to find Father Christmas. Christmas fairy knew Father Christmas would be super busy tonight, but he would be appalled by the situation and would do anything to help. She was right. Just before midnight, she found him busily working away in New York. Once she'd informed Father Christmas of the situation, he was absolutely outraged that the children were not going to have a joyful Christmas day. He quickly jotted down 5 letters, which he instructed the fairy to deliver, before sending one of his elves back to Lapland on his fastest reindeer to organise an emergency sack of toys. Thanking Father Christmas with a kiss on his rosy cheek, the Christmas fairy flitted off to fulfil her duties. The first letter to be delivered was to the local butcher. The fairy placed this on his chopping board. The second letter was for the local greengrocer. She slotted this into his cabbage patch. The third letter was placed in the town seamstress's sewing box, another letter to the headmistress of the local school, and the last letter to the mayor of the town. The fairy was tired from so much flying, but had no time to relax as there was still so much work left to do at the orphanage. When the Christmas fairy returned back to the orphan house, what a sight she was greeted with! The smell from the kitchen was delicious. They'd magically made mince pies, gingerbread men, Christmas cake, Christmas pudding, and there were dozens of bowls of roasted chestnuts being kept warm by the roaring fire. The wooden soldiers had collected a magnificent amount of logs for the fire. Huge piles sat either side of the fireplace, with more being brought in. The robins had even woken up early to help decorate. They brought in holly sprigs and helped hang the paper chains. The Other Christmas fairies had made wreaths and garlands which were now beautifully hanging in the hallway. The Christmas fairy almost cried with delight. However, just before dawn, she began to panic. There was no sign of Father Christmas. Thanking the neighbours' decorations, the Christmas fairy bid them farewell before helping her own decorations back onto the tree. Suddenly, there was an almighty clatter as hundreds of brightly coloured boxes fell from nowhere under the Christmas tree. The reaction from the children and the orphanage staff was unbelievable when they awoke. Cries of joy as they discovered their stockings. Then when they ran downstairs to see the decorations, the food, presents and roaring fire, the delight shown was enough to bring a joyful tear to anybody's eye. Occupants of the orphanage spent the whole morning feasting on mince pies, dancing and singing. There was a knock on the door that afternoon to reveal the butcher and his assistant. They brought with them an array of meats: ham, turkey, sausages, chicken. Then there was the greengrocer, with large boxes of cabbages, carrots, potatoes, and other vegetable goods. Then arrived a package of scarves, with a letter saying that the seamstress would visit tomorrow to measure the children for new clothes. Everyone was incredibly thankful and excited that they did not notice the mayor and the headmistress enter the house. Announcing that the children had been accepted into her school, the headmistress was almost knocked over with the hugs of joy and appreciation that were bestowed upon her. The mayor then looked around the house and announced that whatever the orphanage required would be repaired by the new year. They were no longer allowed to go cold. As a thank you to everybody, the children performed their favourite carols around the newly tuned piano. The Christmas fairy watched with awe at the magical Christmas day she'd helped create. Finally realising what was in those letters, she knew then just how magical Father Christmas really was.